All right. So I am here with John Mollura, and we are new friends from the John Acuff group, the Guaranteed Goals community. And I have
GGC.
been, yeah, the GGC. And I I have been super intrigued by John's story. I also got to sit in on a workshop that he did a few months back on imposter syndrome. So I've gotten to see a sample of his work, and he's doing a lot of amazing things. So, to kick it off, John, give us the short to medium version of how did you end up here doing, as an entrepreneur or entrepreneurial teacher, doing coaching and all of the other cool things that you do. What's your story?
Wow. Yeah. So I always joke that I feel like I've kind of Forrest Gumped my way through life. Like, I never really had a plan, and I just always kind of went with the flow. Yeah, I ended up in engineering school at Penn State back in the late 90s, probably because some guidance counselor told me I'd be good at that. So I just did and made it through engineering school by the skin of my teeth, and was fortunate enough to actually wind up with my first job right out of college working in the space program and defense industry. So for 15 years, I was like a legit rocket scientist. I got hired to work on a Mars program. And the whole reason why I got hired to work on that was not because my grades were spectacular, but because one summer I had an internship with Disney that fell through, and I ended up working at a Boy Scout camp. And I wasn't a Boy Scout. It's just one of my fraternity brothers hooked me up with the job, and I was found myself working in the maintenance crew. And being unskilled labor, my job was to like schlep everybody's tools through like the 15,000 acres of wilderness on this camp in the Catskills. And I also got the very unglamorous job of pulling dead mice out of toilets that had like fallen in there over the winter. And an opportunity came for me to leave the maintenance team, which I said, I don't care what it is, I'll do it. And they said, how about you teach rock climbing? And I said, fine. They go, are you scared of heights? I said, yep, but I'll do it. So I spent the summer rock climbing, and that job teaching rock climbing was actually what got me the job in the space program, because the guy who led test operations, which is what I did, was former special forces in Vietnam and a survival instructor in the Air Force. And when he saw my resume that I did rock climbing and had, some book smarts, he said, you're the kind of guy that like I can send out into the field and test these, various military and aerospace things, and most likely not get yourself or someone else killed. He said, you obviously have some common sense. So that job rock climbing, which was never on my radar, which was only gotten because I lost the internship I thought I was definitely going to have at Disney, was actually what landed me in the space program for years. And I never thought I would ever own my own business. And the whole way that came about was my side hustle was always photography. I was always just loved doing photography growing up. And people started wanting to pay me for it, and I thought, well, maybe I should get a business license and give unto Caesar what is Caesar's. And just had a business license, and just did stuff on the side while I was doing engineering. And the company I worked for went through a lot of changes that weren't in alignment with who I had become during the latter half of my 20s and early 30s. And I decided to leave engineering and do photography full time. And that was over 6.5 years ago. And since then, I've now launched multiple businesses. So started with photography, which was very commercial in nature. So if you've bought something off Amazon, most likely you've at least seen something that I've taken a photo of on there. And as fate would have it, a government project that I was the lead on years ago got reactivated. And it was a Homeland Security project. And they brought me back as a contractor consultant after I'd left engineering. So that was like business number two that I started. I had an engineering consulting company for a couple of years, just to help my previous employer get through a couple of hurdles. Still doing the photography full time. And then closed the engineering thing down, was still doing photography. And the photography had evolved from a commercial aspect into like portraits, and not just portraits, but like portraits that really tell a story. I'd work with people that had gone through like significant valleys of their lives, and these portraits that I would do with them were kind of like a victory cry for them at the end, to remind them of like, kind of like pardon my French, the badass that's inside of them. So they would have a printed picture, of these very creative images. And then that evolved into speaking on imposter syndrome, which is something that, even though I had numerous accolades and awards that my teams and I had earned throughout my time working in the government realm, I never believed them. Like, I always felt like I shouldn't be getting this award. I shouldn't be here. So started learning about imposter syndrome years ago, and turned that into a keynote, and then into a workshop to help other people, number one, understand what it is, which is feeling like a fake. And so that was kind of like business number three. And then that evolved into a men's coaching program, recently this summer. So, so the guy who never said he was going to be an entrepreneur has, now started four four companies that have all kind of evolved from all these life experiences.
I think that's how most entrepreneurial paths tend to go. If you had asked me, even, yeah, when I was 12 years old, when I first started doing the martial arts, if I was going to be any sort of professional athlete at all, I would have said, heck no. And
Right.
then that's been my whole life. And it's just, we kind of fall into these things if we're paying attention. So I have several questions for you
I
because
saw you
it's
furiously writing down.
yeah.
I knew there were some questions coming.
Yeah. So as someone who teaches a lot of children, my start as an entrepreneur came from teaching children, going all the way back to teaching rock climbing. Had you ever taught anything before? Did you have any kind of training or previous experience? And how did that go? Jumping in and teaching a bunch of boys at summer camp.
Yeah. It wasn't just boys, it was like boys from inner city New York. Those were the
Wow.
scouts that we served. So I grew up in Western Pennsylvania, so like this was all like foreign to me. But what I can say is it was a very natural fit for me. I've just been blessed with being able to communicate with people on whatever level they're on. So whether it's, an 8-year-old Boy Scout who's like getting ready to like literally do a controlled fall off a cliff rappelling, or communicating with an admiral or a director of NASA, I'm able to find just common grounds, and that's just been something I've been blessed with. So it was a very natural fit. Now, a lot of that was probably modeled by my mother, who was a kindergarten teacher. And so many, like, my grandparents were educators, both my dad's parents were educators, my mom was an educator, I married a high school teacher. So I've been surrounded by educators my whole life, but it is something that has always come naturally to me.
That's awesome. You answered my follow-up question, which was going to be, was there anyone, that kind of had an influence? Because there's always that nature versus nurture kind of debate when we're looking at these sort of things. And
Yeah.
usually it's a little bit of a combination of both. But yeah, having a kindergarten teacher for a mom, is definitely going to bring in those elements of teaching empathy at a young age, which is something that's super important in coaching and in photography, which
Yeah.
you did fill a gap because I had done like a little bit of background research on you, and I was wondering where the photography came from. But it sounds like it that ability to jump into that entrepreneurial venture came from drops in the bucket over years of just being
Mhm.
interested in it.
Yeah. Yeah. I got my first camera, I think, for my 7th or 8th birthday. I wanted a hamster. And my mom, in her infinite wisdom, probably realized she was going to be the one taking care of said hamster.
Yep.
And to this day, she doesn't know why, but just on a lark, she bought me a camera. Now, this is back in the early 1980s. So it was like a film camera with like the flash bulbs that actually popped, that you'd have to replace the whole flash strip. So, but I loved it. I just always loved being able to capture the way I saw things, because I've always looked at things differently than people, literally and figuratively. So a lot of my early photography, and when I did a lot of like fine art photography or nature photography, it wasn't these like big grandiose landscapes. It was like a close up on some rock, but from an angle that people could never see. So when I did photography, I did a lot of teaching. I'd do private instruction and I'd organize community photo walks. And I would always give people a theme when we do these photo walks. Like, I don't know, take pictures of doorknobs in town. We live in a pretty historic town. I live in Delaware, which you're in Connecticut. So, same age of things here. So there's some pretty cool architecture around. And after we would do these photo walks, I would always invite people back to my photo studio, and anyone that wanted to share would have an opportunity to put them up on the screen. I had a projector in my studio. And it was so neat to see how people would interpret something differently, like the exact same theme and maybe even the same doorknob, so to speak. But they always look different because everybody has a different point of view and a different perspective on things. So that's one of the things I love about photography is and art is that you can create something with all the same materials, but the individual is what really makes it a unique piece.
Yeah, and that thread of seeing the light in others seems to come through a lot of the work that you do. As I was checking out your website, there's a picture, like testimonial, and there's a picture that you did of a or photo that you did of a young girl, and the testimonial from the mom. The girl's in a walker, right? And the testimonial from the mom was that, when you started sharing with her some of the shots that you'd taken during the photo shoot, she started to cry with joy. And I found myself like tearing up, being a mom myself,
Mhm.
having, and the picture was beautiful. It was absolutely gorgeous and so empowering. And that ability to capture the light in people, and especially as a parent, you see all the beauty that your child has, all that potential, and a lot of times the rest of the world doesn't.
Right.
So, finding someone that can capture that is is amazing. So that was, yeah, and I really loved that one. So I think it's kind of obvious, but I'm going to ask the question anyways. What are the parallels, between the work that you've done as a portrait photographer and the work that you're doing to help people overcome imposter syndrome and also do this one-on-one coaching with men that you've started?
Yeah, so the author Rory Vaden, who's one of John Acuff's buddies, he has just a beautiful quote, and Rory always says, "You're best suited to serve the person that you used to be. You're best suited to serve the person that you used to be." So I've taken a lot of the experiences I've had in my life, and to quote Jimmy Buffett, some of them are magic and some of them are tragic, but I've had a good life all the way. Um, I've rolled that into things that really would have been handy for me to have, assuming I would have listened to someone. So, a lot of these, whether it's photography projects or the imposter syndrome or the men's coaching, it's stuff. It's like, I wish I would have had this. So I want to save other people, some of the pain and hardship and share what I've learned to help them.
Yeah, the way we always talk about entrepreneurs are, people that see a solution that's better than what's out there, and they just can't sleep until they put it out into the world. So, was there a moment? Do you have any idea what made you decide to carve your own path? Like you said, you didn't want to be you didn't expect to become an entrepreneur. So was there a particular moment in time, or was it something that happened gradually where you're just like, you know what, I'm done with this whole bureaucracy thing. I need to do my own stuff. Like, how did you have the bravery to step into that?
It was the case where I had just become so drained because I was living in a life that was so out of who I authentically had become. Um, because as I mentioned, I went through a lot of personal growth, and in 2009 was like a pivotal moment in my life. Like we just had our first child be born, and which actually resulted in a lot of anxiety for me, because I just had this core belief based on some unhealed traumas from my youth that I was going to disappoint people, especially the people that cared about me and I cared about. I was going to disappoint them, and like I'd be abandoned. So I remember the first time I was left at home alone with my infant daughter, like she wouldn't take a bottle and like just freaked out. And it like set me into like a panic attack. It was kind of like that devil on my shoulder going like, see, look, you can't even feed your child. Now, was it the end of the world? No, my wife was at Walmart. She was going to be home in like an hour. Um, but it really just set into motion this, like it brought up a lot of old fears of mine and anxieties and really ratcheted them up. And let's face it, the first year of parenthood, you're very sleep deprived, which doesn't help anybody with anything. But then a few months after that, one of my best childhood friends, who I looked up to as an older brother, intentionally overdosed and took his own life. And that like really just like dropped me to rock bottom, because I was someone who had this like veneer of perfection and like superhero kind of thing going on because of all the work and the projects and the missions I had done up to this point over the years working in the aerospace and defense. Because if there's a difficult mission or project or a hazardous, potentially hazardous operation, like my hand was like the first to go up, all because I wanted to have this like validation that I was worthy. Well, spoiler alert, guess what? That validation never came. I never believed it. The awards I would get would just go in a drawer because I felt like they were hollow. So after my friend died, and I was a new father, I was lost. I didn't know what I was going to do, and I couldn't cope. My coping strategies that I had developed over my life, which were not healthy up to that point, they weren't working. And I was like, I don't know what to do. And I actually said a prayer for the first time in years, because after I graduated Catholic high school, I wanted absolutely nothing to do with religion. I actually would like look down on people that were religious. I'd be like, what? You can't do life on your own, you know? And so I have like a very Saul and Paul kind of story. But I just remember saying the Serenity Prayer for some reason, and I just felt this warm sensation come over me, and I thought either maybe this God thing's real, or there's something to it, or I've actually just lost my mind. So, please report. I always tell people like it was obviously the Holy Spirit, even though I didn't understand any of that back then. But it really caused me to start looking at how I was showing up in the world, and I was showing up as someone who was guarding this like intense insecurity with imposter syndrome, which I didn't know what that was. I just thought everybody felt, awful about the accomplishments they received. And I started looking at how I was showing up, and I was very sarcastic and very mean and would push people away because I had this thought like, I'm going to push people away before I have a chance to get hurt. And I started really doing this evaluation on myself in 2009 and start showing up kinder and gentler. And it was like a very long process. So I started developing this. I say developing. I think I was coming back to who I actually used to be as a child before life happens. So over the years, I was starting to realize there's more to life. Like there's more to life than the next project or next mission. And at the same time, the company I worked for was taken over by venture capitalists and became strictly about the finances. Yeah, you're like crinkling your nose. You're
Yeah.
spot on. So it became not a great place to work. They came in and replaced all the leadership. So I did what any self-respecting father of three now at this time. We had two more kids over the years. I went and got another higher paying job at another engineering company and was even more miserable. And I think I was there for 9 months, and my wife was finally like, she's like, dude, you don't look good. Like I had like the pallor of like a wet ashtray, my skin did. And she's like, from all the stress, and like I was just so out of alignment with what I felt like I should be doing, which I didn't know what it was, but I knew that wasn't it, sitting behind a desk anymore. And she said, well, if you did photography full time. I'm like, I had all these noble obstacles, as Acuff calls them. Well, I can't, I'm the breadwinner for the family, and baby needs shoes kind of thoughts. And she's like, I have a really good job. Like, give it a try. She's like, I'd rather see you lose all your money, but not be this miserable. So I give my wife like full credit for like kind of like giving me a boot to the butt to get moving on it. So yeah, in April of 2017, I decided to make my photography business, which I had been building up for years as a side hustle, into my full-time gig. So it was just to the point where I just got so miserable and felt so out of alignment with who I was becoming that motivated me to become a full-time entrepreneur.
That's awesome. That's such a hero's journey, like including the refusal of the call and, all of those different elements of moving through and, having the allies along the way, which I think kind of leads into the work that you do, because one of the themes through everything you just said was really highlighted the importance of having a coach in a community,
Yeah.
whether it's religion, where your coach is God and your community is the church, or it's just a literal coach or somebody, whether a therapist, someone that's there to help support you, and a community that is there to remind you, like, sometimes the baby's just not going to take the bottle. That's okay. That's normal. And that's, sounds like something that you're bringing in this men's coaching group,
Yeah.
and the work you're doing through the imposter syndrome, overcoming imposter syndrome. So tell us a little bit about, this work that you're doing currently.
Yeah, so the imposter syndrome work came about just because I had wrestled with it so much. Once I learned what it was, I was like, there are so many times in my life where like I was getting letters of commendation from the US military and NASA. And I can remember standing on stage and almost being in tears, because not because I was so proud of it, but because I just was certain they were finally going to realize after all these years that like I had been BSing everybody, and they were going to take this letter of commendation away in front of like the entire company, which of course didn't happen. Like the team I was part of, like what we were getting the award for, it was out doing what it was supposed to be doing. So, but I just put together these imposter syndrome things just because I felt like it was such a important message for people to have. And now, like being the father of, a 10-year-old, an almost 13-year-old, and a 15-year-old, it's like you can really see the importance of pouring into people and making sure they understand just how worthy they are of love. So that's what really was the foundation for the imposter syndrome.
And then why men specifically? Like what draws you to that cause with this men's coaching group?
Yeah, I've always been one of those people that I don't always pick up on the subtle hints, the universe or God or whomever leaves for me. And sometimes I need to be hit in the face with a 2x4. I had one of those moments, um, probably in the second quarter of this year. I had moved into a new photography studio at the end of 2022. And I thought, okay, it's in like the swanky new building. It's going to be getting lots of foot traffic. It'll be an increase in like studio shoots. This will be great. And lo and behold, the economy, people don't have a couple $1,000s to drop on a photo shoot anymore. And my photography business like ground to a halt.
Mm,
And my wife and I went away on our 20th wedding anniversary, which was actually up by you. We stopped in New Haven, Connecticut,
nice.
to try all the
Congratulations.
pizzas outside of Yale. Um, and I came home and like there were like zero business or inquiries, because like I'd shut my
Wow.
phone down and yeah, wow. Those weren't the words I said, but there were some exclamation points in there for sure. Um, so yeah, I slammed my laptop closed and went on a walk on the beach. And I'm a big believer in like getting quiet and like letting God speak to me. And my wife always kind of shakes her head and looks at me. She's like, I can't believe you hear voices in your head. I'm like, that's just the way, that's the way I'm wired, man. I don't know what to tell you, babe. Um, but I was walking on one of the beaches by our house, muttering and swearing under my breath and blah 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 blah. And had this voice drop and say, hey, look at all of these things that have been placed in your lap in the past 3 months to help men specifically. And the first one was being asked to lead a men's group called Pain to Purpose, which was started by Pastor Davey Blackburn, um, to help people learn how to walk through valleys of life well with God. Because, just the quick summary of his story is in 2015, Pastor Davey's wife and unborn daughter were murdered in his house while
Oh
he
my
was at the
goodness.
gym. And he took that pain and everything that went into that and turned it into ways to help people, walk well. So I got asked to lead a men's group for that, which I'm like, are you kidding me? I'm like a Guns N' Roses fan, like old punk rocker. I used to play in rock bands, and like I'm leading a Bible group. Okay. And then the next thing that happened was a client of mine invited me to a workout group, and it's called F3. It's a worldwide workout group. It's for men, and it stands for Fitness, Fellowship, and Faith. And the whole point of it is to invigorate leadership in the male community, because men, aren't historically great at creating communities, especially once we become older, right? And we get off the sports teams and all that. So F3 was started by former Green Beret and his buddy, just to give men something to do. And it was like, let's let guys work out together. So there's 5 principles of it. It's open to all men. It's free. It's always outside, rain, snow, heat, cold, whatever, we work out outside every week of the year. It's always peer led. So it's always one of the guys in the group steps up and lead it. In fact, I actually just led our group this morning at our workout when we met at 5:15 a.m. So, and then the last thing is we always end in a circle of trust. So after the workout and we're all sweaty and gross, anybody have any prayer requests? Anybody have any celebrations? Anybody need help with anything? And guys share, because, a lot of times men don't feel comfortable sharing that they're struggling or they need help with something. So being able to have other guys to lean on and be there to back you up is huge. So building that community is extremely important. And we all kind of put our arms around each other, and it's sweaty and gross, and the leader leads everybody in a prayer and prays for everybody that needs it. And it's not necessarily a Christian group. It's just the faith part comes into believing that there's something bigger than yourself. So that was the second thing for men that got dropped in my lap, as my photography business was like just in a holding pattern. And then the third thing was I heard a podcast, and the guest's name was Johnny Elsasser, and he's a former Army Ranger. And long story short, Johnny found himself, from being like a very elite soldier and private security detail for ambassadors in Iraq, to winding up like just sitting at some desk job working for the government in an apartment by himself because his wife had divorced him, and he was living just to get wasted every weekend. And so he was talking on this interview. He said, I just had this dark night of the soul where I was like, what happened to me? He's like, I'm elite. I was an elite athlete growing up. I was an elite soldier. And he said, and look at me, I'm sitting here like on a milk crate watching TV alone. And he said, I came to realize that I was an elite a-hole too. So Johnny went through all this personal development work and put it into a book called Design the Man Within. And I was like, all right, cool. I dig this guy's story. I can relate to a lot of it. I was like, 200 pages, no problem. Yeah, $9.99 from Amazon, no problem. Send it my way. I didn't know that at the end of every chapter, there's 19 chapters in this 200-page book. It's like every, like, whatever the math is on that, like 5 to 8 pages, he had something called the work at the end of every chapter. And they were like gut punch type questions to like figure out like how you had been showing up in the world. And they were things like, list the 3 biggest mistakes of your life and how you directly contributed to them. Like, and he's like, I don't care if you don't write it down. This is for you. So I went through all this work and did all the exercises that Johnny wanted me that he had available for us. And some of it was like, I was embarrassed to write them down, but I was like, I'm committed. I'm going to do it. I'm committed to becoming a better man. And the last exercise is send a text message to 3 people and ask them what they admire most about you. And I sent it to 3 people, and every single one of them said the exact same thing, which was never on my radar. And they all said that I take action.
Mm.
And that's like, I'm in Brand Builders Group, which is by Rory Vaden, that guy that I mentioned earlier, that author. And they always talk about, what's your superpower? What's your uniqueness? And I was like, well, I guess mine's taking action, because, I started businesses. I took the rock climbing job, even though I didn't know how to rock climb, and was willing to be trained. I worked for the space program, even though I felt like the dumbest person in the room. But I was always willing to take action. So that's where the Authentic Man of Action coaching program came from, to help guys figure out who they are authentically, so they can serve their loved ones, their jobs, their communities from a place of authenticity, instead of like what they feel like they should do.
Yeah, I like that too. It makes a lot of sense because, if you look kind of just the way things tend to fall out biologically, it's 2023. Gender is an amorphous topic, but there are categorically, people that lend a little more yang, they lean a little more yang, a little more masculine, and a little more feminine. But uh, Oh, and I just lost my train of thought, which is why this is so fun that it's unedited. So my next question for you was, what does it mean to you, in your opinion, to be a man? How would you define that? And what is when you think about the men that you're showing up to serve, what's your vision or your dream for them?
Yeah, my dream for them is to help them stop wondering what if. And what that means is, so many guys want to serve the people that they care about, but there's not a lot of great role models out there, especially if you look to popular culture. Like, men are like given like 2 examples from Hollywood. You're supposed to be the lone wolf, like Rambo, who can take down a helicopter with a rubber band and a thumbtack and never complains about anything. That's BS myth number 1, because guess what happens to a lone wolf in the wild? They don't make it very long. Or the other thing that is fed to everybody, that men are, if you're not Rambo, then you're just some buffoon who's like hapless, like Homer Simpson, or pick any father from any sitcom for the past whenever in TV. So those are like the examples that guys are given. So men end up sacrificing and not even like doing the work to figure out who they are, just to jump right in and serve people that they care about. And a lot of times that's, to serve them financially, or to get things, or just not even put what they want to do on hold, that authentically lights them up, because they don't even know. A lot of times they've never asked those questions. So that's why my program starts with, men, stepping them through the Enneagram to understand who they are and their personality. I would say, we got to understand your head, your heart, and your hurts, because that's what's going to motivate them. And then once we get a foundation of, this is why you respond like this, dude, they can be like, oh, I never knew that's why I lashed out, or why I would shut down. It's like, well, that's not, it's because of how you're wired. It's because of these kind of hurts in the past. So now how can we figure out how to retool that and show up authentically?
Yeah, yeah, and actually my ADHD brain clicked back in, and it's the action thing that I wanted to comment on, because what you're doing is you're giving them actions, which men do tend to lean towards wanting to take action and just like fix the thing. So you're
Right.
giving them actionable things that they can do to get to know themselves. So you're framing it kind of in that, maybe that Rambo sort of model of like, go do something, but like, go do something about yourself.
Yeah.
Figure yourself out first, so that you can show up better for everyone else around you. So I think that's an awesome approach to embracing, just the natural way that men tend to view the world, and it's kind of a pace lead. So you're starting them from where they are, and then giving them the action steps to move towards that introspection and self-awareness.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a 6 pillar process. Like, I help them with their self-awareness on the first one. Then we build up like their resilience. And that's where like the imposter syndrome talks come in, and the skills to that. helping them take credit for things, that they've done good, helping them feel their feels. I always say, it's like, don't just shove stuff down, like your pain and whatever. Don't just shove it down, because number one, it's going to come out sideways one way or the other, right? It doesn't disappear. And number two, when you numb your pain, it also numbs all of your emotions. You don't get to selectively numb. So if guys are like numbing their pain, literally or figuratively, that also numbs their ability to feel joy, happiness, like the positive emotions. So it's like, feel your feels, like let's get used to this and process it. And then giving them vision for like, okay, we understand what motivates you. We've given you some skills to build your resilience so you can keep going when it gets tough. What vision do you want now of your life? How do you want to serve those that you care about authentically? And then teaching them how to communicate, with like the nonviolent, model of observing what's going on, identifying feelings, identifying needs, and then making a request and getting people out of this you never, I always, those absolute terms, get them out of that. And the example I always give, you'll appreciate this, being a fellow martial artist. I always say, like, here's two ways to communicate something. I say, the first way, let me know how you think this would have gone. In 2010, there were a lot of break-ins in our neighborhood, and I didn't feel comfortable, just going out and buying like a firearm to keep my family safe. But I also realized, despite playing ice hockey for 12 years of my life, I didn't know how to physically defend myself. So let me know how you think this would have gone if I would have come home to my wife and said, "Hey, I want to leave home 2 nights a week, right at dinner time and bedtime, because we had a 2-year-old at home and my wife was 6 months pregnant with our second child. I want to leave 2 nights a week, drop $135 every month, and go to karate class. Cool?" Like, that would not have gone well. But instead, I framed it as, "Hey, I don't feel safe. I feel very unable to protect us. Would you be okay if I tried out a karate class for a month?" And she was like, "Why haven't you signed up already?"
Yeah.
So teaching those kind of communication skills instead of like, I won, I need, it's identifying what's actually going on. And then helping the guys take action is the fifth pillar. And then the sixth one is ownership. Because if you take action, you got to take ownership of the good and the bad,
Yep.
and getting people out of this victim mentality, and where it's everyone's against me and things never work out and everything sucks and blah, 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 blah. And I'm not talking about true victims where horrible things have happened. I'm talking about that victim mentality of everybody's against me. So teaching guys how to like take ownership for things and like, yep, I dropped the ball on that, and here's how we're going to do better next time, and meaning it and not just paying it lip service.
Yeah, and even when horrible things happen, I mean, the three men that you talked about being inspirations for starting this work, horrible things happened to them, and they made a choice to not be a victim, and as best they could take a terrible thing and turn it into a positive. And if you look at a lot of the most inspirational people out there, that's what they did. They took terrible situations and used them to help create a better world for themselves and for the people around them. Those are the people that we tend to look up to in this world.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, fabulous work. I love the program. So what are some experiences that some of your people that you've worked with, whether it was at a speaking event, or do you have any favorite stories about the impact that your work has had on people that you've gotten to work with?
Yeah, there's so many. And someone shared with me at a workshop, um that I did on imposter syndrome, because I'll do, the keynote, but then I'll also do workshops where I step them through, identifying how imposter syndrome is showing up, what it's truly costing them, and then, different ways to turn it down. And I had a woman come up to me, and she didn't even like introduce herself. She just said, "Can I hug you?" I was like, "Yep, okay, sure." No
Aw.
problem. And she just said, she said, I'm getting ready to take a leave of absence for my job because anxiety and my depression are so just bad. I can't work right now. And she said, I never heard of imposter syndrome. And throughout your talk, everything you said was like it was directed for me. She said, this fills in so many gaps that I just thought there was something wrong with me. And like it it's really powerful because, you know, I tell these stories all the time and I do talks and podcasts and workshops and all these things. And it's like, hasn't everybody heard it by now? So just to hear that and realize how impactful it is and how it can be serving so many people just to get out of our own way sometimes and not play small can really impact people. So that's one of my favorite stories is just to help someone give a framework and maybe some resources to help with something that they've wrestled with for obviously quite a while.
Yeah, and it's amazing how, when used in the right way, labels can be so empowering. Because, like, if you're sick and you don't know what's wrong, it's terrifying, and that's what someone who's experiencing any type of anxiety or, things like ADHD or being on the spectrum or imposter syndrome, if you don't know what it is, then you just feel like something's wrong with you, like you're broken. But then as soon as you can put a label to it, it's like, oh, it's cancer, or oh, it's ADHD, or oh, I'm experiencing imposter syndrome and there's other people like me. Once you have that label, now it just connects you in a different way, and it's almost freeing. It's fascinating how that works out. I've heard that story again and again in a lot of different ways. It's like as soon as you recognize who you are and there's others like you, then it opens up a whole bunch of possibility, and all of a sudden people that are anxious are a little bit less anxious. Like, it's still there, but they know what it is. There's a name to it now. So it's kind of like, the movie Jaws was so impactful because the shark didn't work, so they could barely show it. So it was always this like ghost in the background.
Yeah.
And that's what made it so terrifying. But as soon
Yeah.
as if we had seen it the whole movie, it wouldn't have been as bad. So for someone who's getting exposed to the idea of imposter syndrome for the first time, what are some warning signs or some ways that you can recognize that it's starting to creep in and take hold, even if you know what it is? So it's very insidious. So sometimes it
Yeah.
can turn into like this self-sabotage sort of mechanism that's just pulling the foundation out from underneath you while you're trying to, keep climbing the ladder. So how can we start to recognize that it's starting to take hold?
Yeah, awesome question, Stephanie Ann. And Dr. Valerie Young, who continues to this day to do a lot of work on imposter syndrome, but Dr. Young has been doing work on imposter syndrome since I think the late 70s or early 80s. And she talks about 5 different ways imposter syndrome can manifest itself. So these are barometers I always share with people. Say, hey, if you feel yourself falling into one of these categories, which by the way, I can identify with all of them at some points in my life, maybe take a pause and use it as a gauge to look in and be like, okay, what's going on? So the first thing Dr. Young talks about is, that superhero mentality. Like, I'm here to save the day. And, there are the people that always find themselves at work till 9:30 at night, putting out everyone else's fires. It's like, is that really your problem to fix? Or are you trying to give yourself validation that you're supposed to be here? The second one that she talks about is being a natural genius. So if you're someone who things have always come easy to, when life starts really getting complicated, especially as an adult, you start having kids and there's jobs and maybe you're moving and aging parents and, you know, the terrifying news that's always out there and being fed to us 24/7. When all these things start adding up, people that things have historically come easy to, if all of a sudden they're having difficulty, it can rock their whole foundation of who they think they are. So, if it's like, wait a minute, why are things not coming easily to me anymore? Am I falling apart? Am I not who I thought I was? It's like, no, you probably just have way more on your plate than you ever did in your life. So that's another thing to talk about, or another reason to stop and kind of do some introspection. Then she also talks about being the expert. These are people that it's like, I really want to launch this podcast. But you know what? I should probably read a couple more books on this and maybe listen to a couple more podcasts on running a podcast before I do it, because I want it to be perfect. So whenever those thoughts come in, like I need to do a little bit more training, it's like, do you? Or
I like that.
maybe, yeah, or maybe are you stalling?
Yep.
Um, yep. So then the fourth way is being like the lone wolf. Like you don't need help from anybody. And I really can identify with this whenever I was in engineering, because part of my job was to write these very detailed test plans for whatever thing we were working on. And they had to be detailed because there were hazardous operations and things were expensive, and we kind of got one chance at this stuff, and we didn't want to turn it into confetti and have it go bang when it wasn't supposed to go bang. Um, but I would write these like 90-page test plans and like never send it out for peer review until like the last minute. And the reason why was not because I thought I could do it myself. It's because I already felt unworthy to be where I was. I'd be damned if I was going to give someone fodder to be like, hey, look at all these red lines, John. Hey, look, we actually all know you're not supposed to be here now. Like, so being a lone wolf, if you just start kind of like retreating back into yourself, it's like, what's going on? Why aren't I asking for help? And then the fifth one, which I always leave at the end because it always steps on so many people's toes, is if perfectionistic tendencies start creeping up. And one of John's quotes that I always love to use at this part in the keynote is, perfectionism is nothing more than fear dressed up in a tuxedo. Yeah, perfectionism is nothing more than fear dressed up in a tuxedo. It's just very fancy fear, because perfect doesn't exist.
Right.
And like Seth Godin always says, shipped beats perfect every day of the week. Like just get it out there and make a commitment that once it gets out there and you realize what could be better, make it better. So yeah, so those are some 5 ways that it can crop up. So being, trying to be the superhero, if you're the natural genius and now all of a sudden you're stumbling over everything, you're not falling apart, you're just welcome to being human. Then there's the expert. Are you trying to do too much training? The lone wolf mentality, and then very perfectionistic tendencies start cropping up. So those are some warning signs to hit the pause button and see if imposter syndrome's creeping in.
Well, I feel completely attacked, but no, yeah,
Right?
those
Yeah.
resonate.
There's usually a lot of groans. I'm always waiting for like a tomato or something to come flying
Yeah.
out.
Yeah, no, those are good. So on on the flip side, trying to find a little bit of positive, when should we listen to that voice? Like, how do we know when it's giving us some valuable information or motivation? Like, what are ways that we can make friends with it and kind of use it to some
Yep.
degree rather than fighting against it. So there's, I like you talk about in your work, you're not going to turn off the voice. So how can we learn to kind of make friends with it and cooperate a little bit somehow?
Yeah. Well, I don't know if I ever would make friends with it, but I always like to use it as a like I said, like a gauge. Because
Hmm.
feelings make great gauges, but feelings make awful compasses. So
I
let's
like that.
yeah, thank you. That was Pastor Davey Blackburn, the guy that started Pain to Purpose. He said that once in a sermon. I'm like, ooh, write that one down.
Yeah, that's
Um,
a good one.
yeah, thanks. Um, but when those feelings start coming up, the best way that I found to combat it is by being preemptive. And I always tell people, create what I call an archive of awesome. Like set a timer for 10 minutes and write down accomplishments you've done in your entire life. And they don't have to be big accomplishments. It could be little things like I won the Pinewood Derby when I was 8 years old, in the Cub Scouts. Like write things down like that. And they said, and all the way through your adult life. And it could be, things like I got a compliment from someone at the store on my earrings or my t-shirt. And the reason why that's important, these little wins stack up, is because when imposter syndrome gets real chatty, it's going to just bring up all these things that you can't do. Right. And the reason why I have everybody write stuff down from early on is fear doesn't fight fair. So fear is going to bring something up that happened when you were, a little person and trip you up decades later, right? So if fear's not going to fight fair, let's not fight fair fighting fear. Let's declare guerrilla warfare on fear, if you will.
Yeah.
So I would say, keep a note in your phone, or if people sign up for my newsletter, I send them a PDF to have them fill out, like their archive of awesome. And that's because on days when you're not feeling worthy or up for it, or you're feeling like a fake, or you can't do this, or there's no way you should have this responsibility, you can confront it with data and be like, oh, you know what? I did fill up 5 pages in my notebook with awesome things I did, or things that make me happy. And be quiet, fear, because I can do this. I've done it before. That's why those letters of commendation I talked about, that like I stuffed in a drawer and thought they were gonna like take away from me, they're hanging behind me. That these are all things that I've earned throughout my life. Just as a reminder on days when like I walk into my office and I'm like, I don't know why this person wants to interview me. Like, I can look at the wall and be like, oh, that's right. I've done some cool stuff and I can be a resource to people. And here's some proof. Okay, let's make this happen. Let's go. So those archives of awesome are very tangible things that we can use to turn the volume down on imposter syndrome.
Yeah, that's fabulous. I like that. And action is one of the best remedies. So you remind yourself of
Yep.
the things that you did take action on. It's hard to say you're not a business owner if you have an LLC. You
It's
by default you are a business owner. So and now you just take the next action. So I really like that. That's
it's
fabulous. Yeah. All right. So I have a couple of rapid fire ish type
okay.
questions for you. They don't have to be super fast answers. But so just kind of as an entrepreneurial teacher, that is a coach, and that's kind of the work that you do, or as a photographer, honestly. But maybe we'll focus on the coaching for this. What should people look for in someone that does what you do? So how do you find someone who does what you do and know that they're legit and worth working with?
Oh man, that's an awesome question. And that's where testimonials and reviews are so powerful. Um, and if you are a business owner, get over yourself and don't think you're bothering your past clients that love you for reviews, because they're so important. And people whose lives you've affected, regardless if you make muffins as your side hustle, or your entrepreneurial gig, or you're a coach, it's so important to get reviews, because that's one of the best ways to legitimize someone. Look at the reviews, and you can usually tell if they're fake or just bogus. But that's one of the biggest things, is look at reviews. And if you own a business, here's a free tip for business owners out there: create like kind of like a boilerplate, or like a template email. you know Dear, and put in note to yourself, fill in name here, and remind of how we work together and when. It really helps businesses like mine. Reviews really help businesses like mine. I'd appreciate if you could just take a few minutes. Here are some sample questions for you to kind of answer, like do the work for them, and then put a direct link to wherever you want your reviews to go. So like I use Google just for all my reviews. There's a direct link that takes them right to my Google page, but not only my Google page, but like the review section. So they click it and there's like already some, templated, questions that they can answer. John really helped me feel like I wasn't alone. Um, the biggest problem he helped me solve was, that I feel like a fake. And my biggest takeaway was that, fear hates facts. Boom. It took them like a minute to do, and everything's there for them. So reviews are super important, and also getting reviews from the people that know, like, and trust you.
Yes, no, and that I love that advice on two levels, because it is so helpful, as a business owner. Like we have at our martial arts school, we have an email that's set up to automatically go out after someone's been training for
Nice.
about 6 months or so. So if you have any kind of automation set up
Yeah.
in your business, it's something that you can just make it so you don't even have to do it every time, because
Yeah, that's awesome.
imposter syndrome can get in the way and it can
Mhm.
get scary to ask the questions. So if you have it automated, it's just going to happen for
Right.
you. You can even make up an office manager name to like send it out, have this so it's not coming directly
Is
from
it
you.
Master Ken? Is
Yeah.
your office manager Master Ken?
Yes, actually, what is hilarious is my instructor's name is Ken.
Oh,
So when the
really?
Master Ken, yeah, the Enter the Dojo YouTube thing came out, it was extra hilarious. Yep. And then the other thing that I love about that is, so you're doing that, you're taking action for the success of your business. And then what you're going to end up with is a whole bunch of commendations that you can put on your wall to remind you, when you are feeling imposter syndrome, you can go look at your review page and all of the wonderful things that people said about you to remind you of why the work you're doing is worth
Yep.
doing. Awesome. Very cool. So now what's one thing that you would suggest to our listeners that they can apply in their life today? So from all the work you've done, like what's a tidbit, something you've given us a bunch of great stuff already, but what's one little thing that we could do today to help us with our confidence, overcoming imposter syndrome, all that stuff?
Yep. So pull your phone out, everybody, and push pause and set a timer for 10 minutes. And it doesn't matter if you write down in a journal or on your phone or on the PDF, I'd be happy to send you automated. Write down accomplishments that you've done throughout your life. Could be finding the parking space when you went grocery shopping yesterday. That's a win. Could be figuring out how to set the dials in your car to actually defog your windows in the morning. So just take 10 minutes and write down big wins, little wins from your entire life. And if you're like, I don't have any wins from my entire life, I don't know. Did your favorite Guns N' Roses song come on and you caught it once? If you're old like me and were able to record it, off the radio, like write that down. And what you'll find is 10 minutes probably won't be enough because it becomes fun and becomes a little bit of a game. So that is like the number one thing that I tell people is just take some time to write down some accomplishments you've done, big and or small, from any point in your life.
Yeah, and that ties right into positive psychology and like Martin Seligman's work. So if you, our brains can only pay attention to the positive or the negative. So if we've tuned our minds to focus on the negatives that are around us, it gets really hard to see the positives. So this practice that you're giving your clients is, and the people that come to you, is helping them start to recognize all of the little things. So like one of John Acuff's soundtracks, the things he likes to say to himself, is, everything's always working out for me. And when you say that, now your brain goes to work to try to find the evidence for how things are working out for you,
Yeah.
and it can be really hard. And there's a lot in our world today that tries to pull our attention to the negative because that's
Oh
what
yeah.
sells. So
Oh yeah. There are
yeah.
tens of thousands of like software engineers and coding engineers and psychologists who, like, that's their job, is to like get our attention. Like
Yep.
that's what they get paid to do, and they probably get paid a lot.
Yeah, no, if the service is free, then you're the product. Your attention is what's getting sold to advertisers so that that company can make money. Yeah, no, really good stuff. So what do you think the most valuable lesson you've learned through your entrepreneurial journey is?
Oh,
I know. It's hard to pick just one.
so, this is not an overly positive one, but it's something people need to hear, and I wish I had known it. Is just because you have an amazing product and people know, like, and trust you, does not mean they're going to buy your product right away. Like that I had tremendous success and a lot of like popularity locally with my work and my photography before I went full time, and I thought this is going to be a cakewalk, and it was not a cakewalk. Like, people were rooting for me for sure, but I thought they'll all become customers. Wrong. Those are two different sets. There's your supporters and your cheerleaders, and then there are your clients, which there can be some overlap, but that's one of the biggest things I wish I had known, years ago, was just because people love your work doesn't mean they're necessarily going to buy it.
Yes, that is painfully true. And Good to Great. There's an analogy that Jim Collins talks about, the book Good to Great, about firing bullets, then cannonballs. So, like on the old timey ships, when gunpowder was a limited resource, so they would kind of get their target by firing bullets first, and then once they knew they were going to hit, then they'd put all the resources into firing the cannonball. And we wasted a lot of time, energy, and money in our entrepreneurial journey over the years, like every entrepreneur does, but firing cannonballs and then realizing that the market wasn't ready for it or not interested in it, or so if you
Yeah.
find little ways to test before you go all in,
Yeah.
and that perfectionism can get in the way of that because you want to put out something that's perfect and awesome and you've figured out every little thing. But if you make this wonderful product, but then it's not what the market wants, it doesn't matter how wonderful it is. And
Yeah.
of course, your family and friends and your cheerleaders, like you said, are all going to be rooting for you, but it doesn't mean they're going to pay you for it. So, yeah. No, that's really good advice. All right. So, most important question. How can people get in contact with you? So if they're interested in what you do, how can they learn more about you, follow up, become a part of your coaching program?
Awesome. Well, there aren't too many John Molluras out there. So it's just johnmollura.com, JOHNMOLLURA.com. And you'll be able to see about the imposter syndrome keynotes and workshops that I do. There's also coaching tab there. And it's always a free initial coaching call where guys can set it up with me. We chat about, hey, where are you at, man? Where are you looking to go? What are some roadblocks you've had? And, just chat and make sure we're a good fit for each other. So the first one's always totally free. I'm not salesy. I truly just want to see if we're a good fit to help. So johnmollura.com, on all the socials, just John Mollura. So Instagram, Facebook. If you look for John Mollura, that's me.
Awesome. Very cool. Well, thank you so much. You're doing amazing work in the world, and keep doing what you're doing. Keep being you. It's
Thanks,
fabulous.
Stephanie. Yeah.